For his mistress, husband slapped wife 100 times. She divorced, became a CEO, now he regrets it. She loved him more than herself, yet he hurt her 100 times for another woman. But years later, the same man now whispers one thing in silence: regret. This is her story. They said New York never sleeps, but for Ariana, the city had gone silent the night her marriage died. The skyline glowed like 1,000 little promises she no longer believed in. The hum of taxis, the chatter of late-night crowds, even the whisper of wind between high rises, all of it faded under the weight of one truth: Liam didn't love her anymore. At least not the way he used to. Ariana had once been his favorite part of every day. She remembered mornings when he'd wake her up just to say her name. Ari, you're my reason to breathe. Back then, love felt easy. Back then, everything glittered. But glitter, she'd learned, doesn't last. It just clings to you long after it should have washed away. The shift had been slow, invisible almost. It started with the little things. A missed text here, a forgotten dinner there, a smile that never quite reached his eyes. Then came the excuses. Work's crazy lately. You wouldn't understand. Stop overthinking. But Ariana wasn't overthinking. She was watching her husband drift into someone else's orbit. Someone who wore her perfume. Someone who answered his phone with a giggle when Ariana called late at night. The night she confronted him, the apartment was glowing with city lights and tension. Dinner sat cold on the table. Just tell me the truth, she whispered. Her name, Liam. He didn't deny it. He didn't even look sorry. Why does it matter, Ariana? Things haven't been right between us for a long time. The words landed harder than any slap could have. That was how he hurt her, again and again, with words that bruised deeper than skin. One sentence, 100 times, until she stopped feeling entirely. She didn't cry that night. She just walked to the window, staring down at the river lights, and asked softly, was it worth it? Liam said nothing. Silence, she realized, was his final weapon. The next morning, Ariana left. No drama, no shouting. Just a single note on the counter. Don't worry. I'll stop being the problem. She moved into a small studio apartment in Queens, traded her wedding ring for rent money, and got a part-time job at a design agency she'd once freelanced for. She slept less, worked more, and tried to convince herself that survival was progress. But heartbreak, like New York, doesn't stop moving. One night, as she sat sketching logo ideas under a flickering lamp, a tear landed on her notebook. It blurred her lines, turned her design into something new, and that mistake gave her an idea. What if she built something from her pain? Something of her own. She stayed up till dawn, registering a small business under her maiden name, Ari Nova Designs. It sounded powerful, like rebirth. Weeks turned into months, coffee into fuel, dreams into deadlines. Ariana worked tirelessly, taking any client who'd listen. She learned marketing, coding, pitching, skills she never thought she'd need. And slowly, the pieces of her life started falling back into place, one brave decision at a time. Meanwhile, Liam's life took a different turn. The woman he'd chosen over Ariana, her name was Tessa, loved the version of him that spent money easily and smiled for photos. But when his business deal went sideways and the money ran thin, so did her affection. He came home one night to an empty apartment, a note on the table that looked eerily familiar. Don't worry. I'll stop being the problem. Karma, Ariana would later think, never misses an address. By the end of the first year, Ari Nova Designs had its first big contract, a fashion startup that wanted a full rebrand. Ariana poured her heart into it, and when the campaign launched, the company went viral. Suddenly, everyone wanted to know who this mysterious young designer was who turned emotion into art. That's how success came. Not like a wave, but like sunrise, slow, steady, inevitable. One evening, a journalist from the Manhattan Journal interviewed her for a feature titled The Woman Who Rebuilt Herself. When he asked what motivated her, Ariana smiled softly. A heartbreak that taught me how to love myself. When the article was published, Liam saw it. He'd been scrolling half-mindedly, avoiding work emails, when her face appeared on his screen. That smile, gentle but confident, hit him harder than any memory. He clicked the headline, and as he read, each word felt like a mirror he couldn't look away from. She divorced quietly, built a company fiercely, and now stands as one of New York's youngest female CEOs. Liam put down his phone and looked around his empty apartment. It was silent, cold, lifeless. Just like the version of him she'd left behind. That night, he poured himself a drink and whispered, "What have I done?" But apologies, he'd soon learn, sound small when whispered to ghosts. Years passed, and the city that had once broken Ariana now carried her name in its skyline. Ari Nova Designs occupied 3 floors of a Soho tower, her logo etched on glass that caught the morning sun like a promise kept. And while investors called her visionary and magazines named her the woman who turned heartbreak into an empire, Ariana still worked late, still stared out at the East River sometimes and wondered if healing ever really ended. On one gray October afternoon she was preparing for a product launch gala when her assistant said a visitor was waiting. And when she stepped into the lobby she froze. Liam, older, edges softened by years of regret, holding a cheap bouquet as if flowers could rewrite history, and in that instant every memory she'd buried rose again. The laughter, the silence, the loneliness, the way she'd once counted her own worth by his approval. He spoke first, voice rough from unslept nights. "Ari, I saw your article again. I had to see you, just once," and she answered calmly, "You're seeing me now." Because time had taught her that closure is not a conversation, it's a decision. Still, she invited him up, not out of longing but out of grace, and in her office, surrounded by sketches, awards, and the hum of computers, he looked small against the life she had built. "You look happy," he said, eyes tracing the city behind her, and she smiled faintly. "I am. Though happiness looks different than I thought," and he nodded, swallowing words he'd rehearsed 1,000 times. "I was wrong, Ariana. I let everything good slip through my hands," and for a heartbeat she almost pitied him. The man who'd traded love for ego and ended up alone in a room full of ghosts, but instead she said gently, "Maybe we both needed to lose what we had to learn who we were." And that truth hung between them, quiet but final. When he left, she watched from her window as he disappeared into the crowd, a blur of gray among a city of colors, and though her chest ached, it wasn't pain, it was peace. That night at the gala she raised a glass to the team who believed in her, to the dream that survived, and as lights reflected in her eyes she realized she had forgiven him not for his sake but for her own. Somewhere far below, Liam stood on the sidewalk looking up at her billboard, the words "Design Your Tomorrow" glowing over her name, and he whispered a soft apology the wind carried away. The narrator's voice fades in for your viewers. Sometimes the person who broke you is the reason you rebuild stronger. And when you finally rise, they'll watch from below, learning too late that love was never the weakness they were. If Ariana's story touched you, subscribe for more. Months rolled into another winter, and New York shimmered again under its silver lights. Ariana had learned to fill her life with things that didn't vanish. Mornings at a cafe on Fifth Avenue, walks through Central Park where strangers recognized her and smiled. Evenings spent mentoring young designers who saw in her not just success but survival. She met people. Many admired her. But one of them, a gentle architect named Daniel, looked at her as if she were the skyline itself, not the broken story behind it, and for the first time in years she laughed without feeling guilty. Their friendship grew slowly, softly, without the rush that used to define her. And though she never labeled it love, she felt safe, and that was enough. Meanwhile Liam watched her world from a distance he'd built himself, catching glimpses of her interviews, her laughter, her life, and every time he told himself he was happy she'd found peace, even as regrets settled like dust he could never shake. One spring afternoon, fate turned another quiet page. Ari Nova had been invited to design a sustainability pavilion, and when Ariana arrived on site, she froze. The lead architect was Daniel, and beside him stood a consultant, Liam. Time folded, awkward but tender, and as the three worked through the day, she realized the city had brought them together not for old wounds, but for understanding. Liam never apologized again. He didn't need to. Instead, when the project launched months later, he sent her a handwritten note that simply read, "Thank you for teaching me what love really means by showing me what strength looks like." She kept it folded in her journal, not as a memory of pain but as proof of growth. Years later, during a speech to young women entrepreneurs, Ariana said, "Success isn't revenge, it's redemption," her eyes glistening beneath the stage lights as the audience rose to applaud. And when she left the hall that night, Daniel waiting with his warm smile, She whispered to the wind that swept over the Hudson, "I'm free now," and the city lights flickered as if they understood. Somewhere across town, Liam watched the same skyline, murmuring, "I hope she knows I finally learned," and though she never heard it, somehow her heart felt lighter, as if the universe had whispered back, "She does." The narrator's voice fades for your viewers. Love doesn't end with goodbye, it transforms into the strength to become who you were meant to be. If Ariana's story moved you, subscribe for more tales of hearts that heal and rise. And so the story closes not with revenge, but with release. Ariana's journey reminds us that healing isn't a straight road or a perfect transformation. It's the quiet decision, every day, to choose peace over bitterness, growth over guilt, and love over pride. New York kept moving, as it always does, but somewhere among the lights a woman once broken built an empire from her heart, and a man who once had everything learned that apologies mean little when spoken too late. Let her story stay with you, the proof that endings can become beginnings, that strength is gentler than anger, and that sometimes the truest justice is simply living well. If Ariana's journey inspired you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories that remind us love may hurt, but it also heals.